Hi, and welcome back to Jody Drawn Out. Today we're going to be creating these adorable jean jackets with a stencil that I've created, available at Etsy.com, Jody Drawn Out. We're going to be learning about fabric paint and all the things that you need to know. So I picked up this jacket. It's a 6 to 9 months. It's adorable as it is, but we're going to doll it up with a stencil that I've created. We're going to be doing some fabric painting. But first we have to wash the jacket. Any garment that you're going to paint has to be washed before you get started because it's got some coating on there and the paint won't adhere properly. So we're going to throw this in the washing machine and then we'll meet back here. Okay. For this project, you're going to need a few items. We're going to need a stencil, and this stencil you can get at my Etsy store, Etsy.com, at Jody Drawn Out. So just go to Etsy.com and put in Jody Drawn Out, and you'll be able to find this stencil right there, and you can purchase it. You're going to need some paint. You can use whatever color you want. And we're going to make our acrylic paint into a fabric paint. There's different ways that you can do this, but we're going to use Martha Stewart's fabric medium, and we're going to be mixing, I believe it's 1 part to 2 parts paint. Yeah, 2 parts paint, 1 part fabric medium. That's going to slow the drying process down on the paint and make it adhere to the fabric better. We're going to need some stencil brushes. I have a variety here. I like the really flat ones. This one has a little bit of a more rounded tip. You can see the difference there. And then I picked up another package at Michael's the other day. So these are flat also. You can only really use 1 color per brush. And you do not want to use a wet stencil brush because it doesn't work. It just seeps underneath the stencil and it could make a mess, so we don't want to do that. If you don't have stencil brushes and you don't want to go to the store and you can't get anything online right now, makeup sponges work really well. I've used these in other videos and for projects. So they're just little makeup wedges and you just dip it into the paint and dip it over your stencil. So these work pretty good too. The best thing I have found to clean stencils is awesome. And you can get this at the dollar store for $1. It's really close to Grease Lightning, and Grease Lightning works fantastic, but it's not always easy to find and it's a lot more expensive. So Awesome works really good, and just be careful when you're using it over the sink that you're not just standing there breathing in those fumes. But we all have masks at home now, so wear a mask if you're going to do that. The other thing that you want is a nail brush or some kind of a scrub brush. This one is a little bit more stiff than I would want, but I did get it at the dollar store for $1, and I'll be extra careful when I use it. And basically, you're going to use your stencil, put it in the bottom of your sink or tub, make sure that it's wet and sticking to the base, and then you're gently going to scrub your stencil. That's the best way to clean them. You want to do it very carefully because you don't want to bend any of the delicate areas because they don't bend back. So if you're really careful with them, you can use your stencils several times. What else? The next thing we're going to do is practice using our stencil on a piece of paper before we get to our fabric. So I just happen to have one set up here, and we're going to do a little demo with our brush and a color. So I'm going to use pink because that's the color I want to use on my first jacket, and I don't want to wash my brush. You want to use a dry stencil brush. That is really important. So that's why I have several brushes. It's not like painting where you take your brush and you dip it in water and then you can use it in another color. It's not the same thing. So stencil brushes really need to remain dry. And so let's get started. Different sizes for different areas. This one's really tiny, and I'm not going to be using it on here today because I'm not doing any stenciling like that. But I will at some point show you how to do different techniques with different brushes on the same stencil, and it'll be really fun. So, but not today, because today we're going to be doing fabric, and we just want to use 1 color today. So the first thing I want to do is tape my stencil to my surface. This is just a 3M low-tack tape, and all I want to do is tape my stencil down so that it doesn't move while I'm stenciling. All right, so we're just going to do a quick demo on how to load your brush properly. You're going to want to have some paper towels really close by. And let me move this over a little bit. So here's our paint. And one other thing, the denim is a dark blue. So I want to use brighter colors or they're not going to show up. I think this pink's going to do really well on there. We don't have to mix the fabric medium in it now because we're just doing it on paper and it's just a sample. And if you're doing anything other than fabric, you don't have to add that fabric medium into it. So unlike a paintbrush, we're going to just gently tap, tap, tap. All we want to do is get paint on the tips of the bristles. Then I'm going to come over here on my paper towel and in small circular motion, I'm just sort of evening. Can you see that? I'm just sort of evening the paint out. I didn't dip it in. It's not, coated. It's just the very tips of the bristles that have paint on them. So just very gently. Then I'm going to go to my stencil. I can either pounce, which sometimes gives you a nice technique depending on what you're doing. And since these are all like connected together, they're welded together, I think the pouncing is probably the safest way to treat this stencil. The other way is a very gentle circular motion, just like I'm doing on the paper towel, but on the stencil. And the other thing that you want to do is be careful not to go off of the stencil. So if you do, this is why you have a border around it. And if you feel insecure about that, you put your tape around the entire border so that your brush goes onto the tape instead of your project, or you'll get a line like that. Okay? So I'm going to just pounce because I think that's going to be the best process, especially on fabric because I want it to get into the fabric. And remember, we washed the jackets before we start the stencil process. I'm going to get ready to do the jacket. Okay, we're going to use some Elmer's Craft Bond, and it says temporary or permanent bond. Now, normally I use a stencil spray adhesive, but we're going to use this because things are really hard to get right now. And I cleaned the stencil, but what we want to do now is spray the back of it very lightly. And I would say to spray about 6 inches away from the stencil, just a really light mist on the back so that when we put it on the fabric, the paint doesn't bleed underneath. So, and you want to do this outside because these aren't really good to breathe in. Okay, that's it. Let's go back inside. Also, a good idea would be to wear a glove when you do that, because if you spray it on your hand, it's really hard to get off. I didn't wash my brush, but you don't want to let it sit too long because you don't want the bristles to dry out. So we are going to, it's still good. It's still moist, but don't let the paint dry on that because it's hard to get off. So the back now is pretty sticky. And I'm going to be able to position this wherever I want on my jacket. I'm using the stitching as my guide here and the top. All right, so now it's adhered to the fabric, and I put some tin foil underneath just in case, well, that's blinding, so that the paint, if it goes through, if I get too much on there, it's not gonna damage the table or whatever you're working on, okay? All right, so we're gonna continue on, and I'm gonna do the same thing, but this time I'm gonna add some of my fabric medium to my paint. 1 part fabric medium, 2 parts paint. I used measuring spoons and I mixed a half a teaspoon of fabric medium and 1 teaspoon of the paint together. And now I'm just putting it on a plate to make it easier for stenciling. Offload on my paper towel and begin. I have to reload my brush periodically. That's just the way it is. So don't overload your brush because less is more. And if I want these colors to be intensified, I'm gonna let this layer dry and I'm gonna do it again. Straight down, and we should have very little bleed underneath. I'm gonna let this dry. I'm actually gonna go put it in the sun. I'm gonna leave the stencil right where it is, and I'm gonna let it dry exactly in that position. And when it's dry, I'm gonna put another layer on it. Remember, one last tip. If you think you're gonna get too close to the edge, you can always put tape around as a border, okay? But still use the adhesive because what we want is nice, crisp stencil. Back out to the sun. We did 3 layers. So, but remember, don't overload your brush. It's not necessary. You can get there. Less is more. If you try to do it in 1 layer or 2 layers, it could bleed underneath the stencil and ruin it. So let's see how it looks. And remember, there's adhesive on the back of this, so you want to really go gently. Take your time. There's no rush. Adorbs. I'm going to take my stencil and put it in the sink with some Awesome on it and let it soak. I love it. I think it's adorable. And I'm going to complete my jacket with white polka dots. Now, I've already mixed up my white paint with my fabric medium. And now what I want to do is use the back of a brush. So I want to see... that's kind of big. Time. Now again, if I didn't have the sun, I would just let it sit here for like an hour and then continue on and flip it over and stuff. But I'm gonna take this board outside and let it dry in the sun. So I literally, and you should have gloves on. Let me put some gloves on. Put this stencil in a plate, and I stood my stencil brush in there because it's a flat brush. And now I'm just like brushing the paint off of my stencil. I mean, not just brushing it, but I'm working it. Again, you just don't, you want to be gentle. A nail brush works really well too. A nail brush has really soft bristles on it because it doesn't want to damage your cuticles. That scrub brush that I have is a little bit aggressive. It'll work for some stencils, but this one is kind of delicate. All right, so now, I'm pretty much ready to rinse this off. My stencil came up really clean, and the next thing you want to do is just pat it dry. Don't rub it with paper. Again, we don't want to bend any of the little tiny cuts that are in there, because once they're bent, you really can't bend them back.